Hello and welcome to this series, The Person of the Therapist. I'm Dee Preston Dillon, and today I'm welcoming Tim Mewmaw, who's a colleague, a friend, and someone who has been steeped in using the symbolic in his work with groups, men's groups, couples therapy, as well as a range from children through adults. So, Tim, I'd like to begin with you sharing with us the specific degree that you have. What would you say is your theoretical leaning? And if you have a specialization, what would you say that would be?
Yeah, so Dr. D, as you know, I met you during my master's program in clinical mental health counseling at Johns Hopkins. Um, um, I, I guess for the last 5 to 6 years, I've been in full-time practice uh, and immersed with you. Then, you mentioned using the symbolic. Obviously, that's come through my work directly with you, and immersed deeply in it through, many conferences and countless hours that I've been able to spend with you at trainings, and then just interpersonally as well. Uh, the drives to and from Hopkins in Baltimore come to
Mm,
mind, right? The
yeah.
hours sort of processing stuff around advanced group and things like that. But in any event, the work that I do with, or I guess theoretical orientation, I think first and foremost, I'm deeply Rogerian. I oftentimes like to just hit his three main points that encapsulate, I think, and I just, it resonates with me so deeply that that psychotherapy need not be anything more than these really three legs of the stool, um, which is unconditional positive regard, right? That desire, that just, it doesn't matter who the person is or what they've done or what our differences are. I want what's good for them. I want what's best for them. Second is the accurate empathic response. And to me, it's that word accurate and response, those words accurate and response are very important because it's not just being able to empathize, it's being able to communicate, demonstrate that the accuracy of that empathy to the person that we're sitting with. If they can't feel that we understand and that we feel their feelings, then it's not really very effective. And then lastly, and this is what balances the other two, is the radical authenticity.
Yeah.
And so that ability to really just say things as we see them, uh, in a non-judgmental way, in a non-directive way, but this is what I'm hearing, or this is what, I wonder if. So coming in with that curiosity,
Mhm.
but also with real, like, authentic clarity about what it is we're seeing, around, particularly around the hard
Mm,
stuff.
mhm. Well, and Tim, I think most graduate students and early clinicians, they build a foundation, as you've suggested, and then they take off on their own and they develop some approach that's far more congruent with who they are. So
Mhm.
with your foundation in that deeply Rogerian, humanistic, the follow the lead of the client and
Yes.
that that real presence, that real solid I'm here for you and I'm present. And at the same time, what I'm hearing you say is to be so authentic as to build that relationship with trust, that trusting alliance that allows the empathy to support, supportive as well as critical feedback. What would you say is part of your own growth? How have you discovered who Tim Mewmaw is in the way that you are, the way that you've grown.
Well, I think what you're sort of pointing toward there is, uh, in my mind, it's the most critical factor in terms of developing or becoming the clinician that we want to be. It really is about doing our own work. And I guess maybe becoming an effective clinician, improving our efficiency in terms of the work that, how quickly we're able to help clients move, uh, or I guess discover insight or self-reflect or yeah, whatever the sort of therapeutic goals are. Ultimately, I think my own experience is, well, I'll put it this way. I draw far more in my work with clients. I draw far more from my life experience, the 25 plus years struggling with my own complex post-traumatic stress and severe depression. And not just struggling, obviously, but deeply immersed in my own therapeutic process and so on, for decades. The deep symbolic work that I've done with you, has is the primary resource for the work that I do with clients. And I think that really is the heart of good therapy, is that
Mm,
it can only come from a therapist who knows the path that we're walking on
mhm.
intimately, personally.
Thank you. Tim, when you say you're bringing the wealth and the richness and the depth and the suffering, the woundedness of your life path, I think you're really grounding us all in how important it is to be reflective and deeply self-aware, and that is an essential component that you bring, that you want for your clients. Now, I know that
Yeah,
you respect the unconscious as well as so from some of the content from the psychodynamic, the unconscious, and I'm fascinated with some of the techniques that you've used with your clients, and I'm wondering if you would just walk us through some of how you work with your clients.
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny to hear you say that on one hand, because I oftentimes am aware of how many my techniques, if you will, how much of it comes directly from witnessing uh, you and sort of finding my own rhythm, but a lot of the same. That being said, the second thought that came to me is, that there have been a number of these sort of key moments for me in my own development as a therapist where I come up against injunctions that have come from you, and I say that somewhat ironically because one of your primary focuses is on removing injunctions, but you'll talk about safety, and sometimes when you're training, you'll say, "Don't ever, we always follow the lead of the client. You don't ever sort of
Yeah.
lead the way or whatever." And you and I have had a lot of talks over the years, like, what? It really seems like you're directing in certain points, and so on. But so I say that to say that there have been these key moments when I'm working with clients where I've had a thought, I've had an inclination to do something, and I've just ended up going with my instinct, even though the internal critic was actually screaming at me, "Dr. D said not to do this," and and
Oh
so
no.
one of
Trust
those that
yourself.
right, well, one of those that has been really phenomenal, and I've ended up using again and again and again. Like you said, I do a lot of work with couples, and I'm finding myself wanting to be able to just show you uh, the setup that I do, but I in a tray I place just a couple of wooden sort of, one looks male, one looks female, and I place those sort of facing each other in the center, and then I have little miniatures of those, and so you've got the adult and the child, right? And I put the child one then
These
all
are
the way up
little
against the
wooden
edge of the tray.
figures that you have.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and they're just nondescript, sort of
Mm-hmm.
humanoid looking things.
Okay. Yep.
And then I just draw two triangle or sort of lines in the sand going out from either one. And essentially, it's a visual that, I can use to help clients when they're arguing about who's right and what's this and you did
Mm,
X. And it's such a helpful visual to say, look, each of you, if this is the two of you, everything that you interpret, everything that you see, understand,
mm,
perceive in the that's happening between the two of you is being interpreted, is being filtered through the lens of all of this that comes from behind each one.
mm,
And
mm,
so
mm,
often we want the other person to understand what our perception is or our experience or agree with that which is
mm,
behind
mm.
ourselves.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's never going to be that way, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I just
Mm,
find like a simple
mm.
that was one of those things that in a moment in one of these sessions, I'm like, I'm not supposed to set up the figures for them. And then afterwards, they were both just like, oh my God, that was so helpful. And I've used it many
Yes.
other times and gotten positive feedback. And it opened up
Mm-hmm.
this whole new use of symbols to me
Mm-hmm.
that now, if I am thinking of a theoretical concept or a psychological concept or construct that I want to explain, and words aren't quite cutting it, then you can use symbols, and it's wonderful.
Exactly. And the rules that apply to one methodology don't apply at all when you're innovating and setting up something new with a different purpose, a different intention, and an entirely different collaborative experience. So I think your innovation, trusting yourself, trusting your instinct has far more value and immediacy for your work with your clients. And I really want to highlight that and how important it is for therapists to not follow recipe books or mandates that, as you suggest, scream in the head, but rather, as Thomas Ogden said, to free the therapist up to be so immediate as to be inventive and trust themselves and look at the doors that's opened for you and your clients. It's
Yes.
beautiful. Do you want to give us another example?
Well, I wanted to respond to what you're saying there about trusting instinct, because it's, I mean, as you know, and I may get emotional at multiple points while we're talking. As you know, that's pretty normal
Mm,
for me. But my own personal history, I mentioned the complex post-traumatic stress. I'm usually pretty open to share with people that I grew up in a religious cult. And so my whole world was constructed for me as a child. And there
mhm,
were very rigid boundaries and these whole belief systems and all of reality was sort of skewed through certain lenses. And that's what was presented to me as a kid. And so the reason I'm mentioning that in context of this trust your intuition is that was the single most underdeveloped and suppressed part of my own developmental
mm,
experience is you
mm,
never trust yourself, question yourself, trust the leader, question yourself, trust
mm,
the book. And so where my life journey has led me has been to, and I also wanted to say earlier, I not to oversimplify when I point at to Rogers, right? Not to oversimplify the complexity of the human being, and the complexity of the work that we do. Obviously, there are infinite
mhm.
numbers of areas of relevant research and study that all come to bear in the work that we do. And so I don't mean to oversimplify it. And in my own life, a big part of that journey toward trusting my instincts has been a combination of education, which was denied to me as a child. And so then pursuing that in adult life, uh, learning, ultimately coming to the awareness. And I love just simplifying this piece, I say to clients all the time, uh, whatever else we may be, we're animals. And we like to pretend that we're not. We wear, we create all these cute little outfits and these ideals that we're something different. But I say, cut me open, cut you open, cut a goat open. We all look about the same inside,
Yeah.
same basic elements. And why is that important? What's important because again, it goes right back to the instinct, the intuition that you're talking about. That how does any animal navigate the world that we live in or that it lives in? It navigates through instinct. The fox, the rabbit, the deer, the wolf, all of them by instinct. And so we're fundamentally no different. And so that, I guess, the single most significant transformation in my own journey has been this awareness. And this is such a central piece of the work that you and we do with narrative sand therapy, teaching narrative sand therapy, and so on. Is it all that's what symbols help do
Yeah.
when we engage the imagination, when we activate, essentially what we're doing is we're helping the individual to explore the depths of their
Yeah.
own mind and their own experience
Yeah.
and to draw from that to
Mm,
learn to trust those
yeah.
intuitions because as we do it, and here's the second track I was mentioning other there's education. The other one has been honestly much through the symbol work that I've done with you, Dr. D, uh, to learn to 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 see how spot on our own intuition has been to get us along
Mm,
throughout life. And I'll give you a quick example from work with a client with that.
mm,
Uh, I could certainly give you personal examples, but I like this one from a client.
yes.
It was a client who uh, had some horrendous early childhood trauma, including sexual trauma from a parent, from a father, and she had created this scene, and she's tracing her finger. There were just like 310 candle holder house facades and she took a few little like green leaf plastic leaf things and put them in the corner and she's tracing her fingers in the sand in front of the houses and she says and actually I like to say when I tell this story I like to say that in my own mind at this point I was a fairly inexperienced clinician certainly in context of working with symbols and in my own mind I was just seeing three chintzy looking candle holders and a pile of plastic leaves.
In
I
a
was
sand
not trying
tray.
in a sand tray. There
Right.
was nothing
Mhm.
significant about it. I didn't, there was no connection with it. It just seemed kind of honestly back to sort of my first experience working with symbols. It's like little chintzy toys, like this is so dumb.
Mm, mm,
So that narrative is sort of playing in my head as I listen to her
yes.
start.
Yeah.
She's trailing her fingers across the sand and she says, "We were the third house. We were the third house from the corner." And she said, "I used to run down to the corner. And down along this long fence row, there was a big bush, and I would crawl under it." She was describing a time when she
Mm,
was about 7 years old.
mm,
I would crawl under the bush, and that's where I would hide and watch Dad drive by and yell out the window my name. And I felt so ashamed and so guilty to not run, to not go. But that's where I would hide. And the work that she did in that tray was so profound. Just validating the instinct, the intuition of that 7-year-old girl, knowing contradicting the judgments, the
mm.
external blame and shame, and all the stuff that had been heaped on her that
Yeah.
she's still carrying, and yet sitting there, tears streaming down her face, recognizing, oh my God, that 7-year-old had the instinctual
Mm,
awareness of what was needed, the need
yeah.
for safety, the need for hiding, for separateness, and so on.
Oh.
And so again, to me, that's just it's one of those examples of the instinct is there and it's authentic and real right from
Mhm,
birth.
mhm.
It's not something that we need to be that that has to be sort of usurped by outside forces. It needs to be reinforced, nurtured, And then certainly we have drives toward different things, but ultimately it's us sorting that out inside ourselves to
Mhm.
figure out, okay, which of these sort of oppositional uh, desires,
Yeah.
makes the most sense for my circumstance right now.
But Tim,
It's an
what
internal
really
thing.
comes through is your deep, deep compassion in this moment of sharing with us, your deep empathy, and that if you had been more an objectifying, distancing therapist trying to um, unpack it or analyze it or interpret it or something different, it may not have given her the pace, the silence, because you've described already inside your head was the diminishing junk that comes in sometimes in therapists' heads, like, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing? There's nothing
Yes.
meaningful here. But your patience and your just visceral, tear-filled compassion in that moment with her, but without taking it over, without putting any spotlight on you,
Yeah.
and then
It's about
recognize,
attunement, right? It's about
yes,
attunement. It's about listening to where the client is and being able to sort of move very quickly from all that noise in my own head,
mhm,
uh, us being
mm,
able to move into the space that they're in and to resonate with them. And I
yeah,
will say that in that moment, I don't recall tearing in that
yeah,
moment with her. It's tearful for me when I reflect
right,
on
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But in that moment, it was more the like, honestly, I've never thought of this before, but honestly, it was probably the good father, so to speak,
yes,
that showed up. The good
yes,
father that's
oh,
validating the 7 year
yes,
old for her wisdom, for her courage,
beautiful,
and all those things, right? And so again, you see that sort of juxtaposition, which is exactly what we do as therapists, right? We provide the nurturing and care and protection
yes.
that was absent in these
Not
traumatizing
questioning
moments.
her, not coming in like a journalist therapist,
Right,
and all of the stealing away from that moment that could happen with
right.
some approaches to therapy, and how you gave yourself permission to be steady, to pace, and to wait, and to
Mhm.
then really hear the story and allow it to come in so it was present in the room. I like to think that, and I like to, in our trainings, to emphasize that symbols are the third presence in the room. And we must,
Yes.
and there you were very early on in your therapeutic practice, allowing the story, the very narrative, to be there with her emotions. And so uh, I just, first of all, I want to give gratitude for the way you're sharing your depth, experience, and how even reflecting on that is so important for therapists to continue, no matter how seasoned one becomes. That reflecting back on, growing again and again from previous experiences, is, it's not ever over with yourself, that she may be
Yeah.
long gone, but with yourself, and how you continue to grow and to cultivate within you new awarenesses. I just want to insert, I like to refer to theorists that have really informed and grounded my own experience. And I've mentioned to you a number of times Eric Berne's transactional analysis, and how it really, for decades now, since the 40s, really helped us respect the inner child. Like, it's in common nomenclature now, but the inner child, and how when you brought in the little wooden figure to go with the larger wooden figures, just a whole, no need to explain. There it is visually to kinesthetically experience Burns' presence to remembering the inner child. And so
No, which was exactly, that's in transactional analysis is exactly one of the concepts that I was
mhm,
intending to demonstrate through that tray, right?
yeah, yeah,
Uh, but yes, and I guess I wanted to jump on that theme about learning from clients and how we continue to learn. Um, that I, you had sort of mentioned one of the possible things we might that might be helpful to talk about is that learning from clients, and one of the sort of examples that popped
Yes,
into obviously it's endless, right? And we see
correct.
ourselves in the work. I mean, even just in that story I just told, uh, you can't help. Well, I think first of all, we can't stand in that space where we validate the 7 year old unless we've been in the space of the 40 something year old in that therapeutic space
Mhm.
and seen our own and learned to validate our own 7 year old, right?
Yes,
You don't
yes.
even see it as a possibility unless you've been there. And so often, I think we as clinicians, we through our trainings, through our graduate school, our reading, the CBT focus, to check all the boxes, fill out the
Mm,
questionnaire, whatever,
mhm,
we
mhm,
we want to fix. We want to
mhm.
be important. The session becomes about us and our ego rather than about the client and where the client is and what the client needs. And so we
Yes.
start analyzing, well, why did you go there? Or what if you had done this instead? Or have you ever thought about, and we start throwing all this other
Mm.
crap in there that,
Intellectualizing it.
yes, that isn't
Mm, mm,
necessary and oftentimes has nothing to do with the client or where the client is, but has
mm,
much more to do with our own ego.
mm,
Uh, but in terms of learning, there was another sort of anecdote. There's a 7 year old kid that I was working with a while back, and I really do see a full range of
yeah.
clients. It's kind of actually what makes this work interesting to me, on a personal level, is to not lock myself into a certain population. As you know, I worked in hospice for a couple of years during my internship, my graduate work, which was amazing, amazing experience.
Yes.
But then uh, I do a lot of work with couples. I do a lot of work with elderly people, and a fair amount of work with teens and some with young children too. And there was this one 7 year old kid that came in, and when I met him, his mom came in first and sat down in the office, and I was sort of, as one will with when you're meeting with younger kids, you have to sort of interact with the parents and get to know them. We've got to build some sort of rapport there as well, right?
Yeah.
And so I walk into my office and I sit down in my chair, and her and I are sort of talking. And I had greeted the young man, and he was sort of not terribly interested, a bit shy, and so that was fine. I was just engaging with her. We came in and sat down in my office. He didn't follow us in right away. Maybe 30 seconds or so after we sat down, he comes crawling in the door and on his hands and knees, and he crawls behind her chair, and he just
Mm,
starts he's just crawling around the room, and I could tell by her body language that she felt kind of embarrassed and a little bit uncomfortable with
mm,
how he's behaving. uh and as I'm watching him crawl around, he starts sniffing like a dog. He starts sniffing like different areas on the floor and stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, in my head, I'm just like, well, he's the client, like my job here, my goal here is to connect with the client. And on one, and that's sort of like cliche, two angels on the shoulders kind of thing. In one ear, I've got this like screaming, oh my God, you can't, you need to like maintain your decorum, like, you're gonna lose the client. There's like all this
oh,
noise over here,
no.
right? And then on the other, she's going to think you're a quack, like, all this kind of stuff. And in the other ear is just this awareness. Well, he's crawling around on the floor. Like, if I need to connect with him, get out on the floor. And so that's what I did. I just got down and started crawling around on the other side of the room. I didn't try to approach him because he seemed like he needed some space. I just started sniffing areas around the floor. And I swear, working with this kid was such a delight. He had a lot of struggles. And I don't know, I guess there are maybe a couple of different things. One thing I learned from him is the limitations of how much we can actually do and transform. Like, oh, and my a lot of my clients teach me that, right? Like, it's not about me. This isn't, get my ego out of the freaking way, because I'm here. We show up to the best of our ability. We try to be present, and supportive and empathic, but our clients are where they are, and their struggles didn't start today. They didn't start yesterday. These are
Yeah.
these are lifelong cycles that they're in.
Mm.
And so it's not a referendum on me or my work. It can be, and part of it's there. That's an important lens to sort of, important area to be reflective about.
Mm.
But it's also oftentimes just this kid is without a dad. There's a lot of trauma. There are limitations for the mother in terms of caregiving and parenting and so on. And so, what level of impact am I going to have? You know, what I hope that he took away, uh, and here's the other piece, is that he could significantly impact an adult, that he could teach an adult something that an adult didn't know, that he could remind an adult of what it is to be a child,
Yeah.
that my eyes could be opened more through my interactions with him, and that he could find himself to be interesting,
Yeah.
that he could experience himself to be interesting and worthy of connection, through the interactions that we were able to have together,
Mm.
the playing together, and the
Yeah.
and the conversations that we were able to have.
So, what a beautiful example of your inner child, you trusting that and giving yourself permission to be fully present, to literally follow the lead of the client. You're also bringing in the very ground of trauma in the body, and that he was showing very much his experience of trauma by acting it out in a way that felt within boundaries. And then for
Mhm.
you to mirror, to come down to the level of where I am, but respect my space, is what I'm, that you did this all intuitively, trusting. So how a wounded child can connect with, non-verbally, another wounded child in the adult, you, a good, loving father model, which you certainly are. And then all of these, we have that model for the mom who was sitting there, seeing a gentle man respecting and being with her son. And so here's a model of filial therapy, family therapy, parent child, and then the collaboration between the three of you, that kinesthetic, that very visceral enactment. And I almost bring in the school of drama therapy as well, play therapy, certainly.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
a beautiful example. Um, so you have so many examples of just being inventive, just being your creative self with your client. Before we move to your symbols, is there another example that you'd like to share? Maybe
Well,
from individuals or your men's group, or a different lesson that you would like us to hear.
I mean, there are so many, the so many. I guess there's one that actually that I was thinking about earlier that might be worth sharing.
Mhm.
And my reason for wanting to share this one is to kind of illustrate how, particularly with narrative sand therapy, or whatever you want to call it, narrative symbol activation work, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's very important to recognize how far beyond just symbols in a sand tray this goes.
Yes.
Uh, but recently, I was working with a client. Um, I've been doing some work with a client And with this client, there's sort of like a transition. There, I mean, with this particular client, I guess we've been working together a lot longer than a lot of my clients, but maybe a year, 15 months, something like that. And there have been, in that time, there have been dozens of sand trays that have been created and so on.
Hmm.
But I find that there's a bit of a sort of flow between a tray will get made, and trays are very powerful and
Mm,
just in and of themselves, and then we do
mm,
activation and all that kind of stuff. But recently, even my last couple of sessions with this particular client, they've been wanting to just close eyes and envision the symbols, and the symbols come alive, and we end up spending the entire session in a in an imaginative landscape
mm, mm,
that is prompted from one tray that was made, but the work that ends up happening so freaking tender
mm,
and vulnerable and powerful. The one most recently just working with one symbol that was in that tray, and they described this character as being terrified, afraid, um, and so just activating where do you see them, what's around them, what's going on,
mhm.
getting into that imaginative space,
Yeah.
and then uh, what do they need? That critical question, what do they need? And coming back to that,
Right.
15 different ways as we progress and watching the client learn
Mm,
essentially through that interaction how to nourish and nurture and care for that anxious 7-year-old part of themselves, 7, 8-year-old part of themselves, and and just seeing that the transformation that takes place in the self-talk, in the self-judgment, and so on, just from spending that time. Again, it doesn't need symbols, just being in that imaginative space,
mhm,
and how we can learn
mhm.
again through just relying on our own instinct. And it's not it's not the therapist's instincts, it's the
Right.
instincts of the client. And that's our job, is just facilitating their
Mhm.
awareness and connection with their own instinctual awareness.
Beautiful.
If we provide the answers, you know, it may make us feel good, but how effective really is it? And how accessible is it? How many times do we as clinicians offer some insight, some perspective that we know the client needs, and then 5 seconds or 30 seconds later, there's some sort of interaction that confirms for us they didn't hear, they didn't receive, it didn't get through, it didn't resonate, whatever it was. And it's
Mhm.
like we have there's a fork in the road. I can badger you with that and say, like, well, this is really what you need to know, and you're
Oh,
paying me for my
God.
time. We we can do this sort of egoic kind of horrible shaming thing with them, or we can just recognize it. We can get creative about it and recognize, okay, it needs to come from within themselves. So what are the questions I can ask? What are the ways that we might access that they might access that awareness from within their own psyche?
I think what you bring to us right now is the vital, essential importance of the therapist's immersion in their own process. That one, as you just told us, your presence gives, because you're able to go into an altered state of awareness, altered state of consciousness, Thomas Ogden's process hypnosis, as it were, you are there present in your own, just very contained, very safe, but permission giving, so that your client and other clients can immerse without feeling judgment or questioning, or an interpretation is going to happen or something, that because you have done a considerable amount of immersion, that you have that grounded steadiness, that protective allowance, permission, that opens that channel, that deepens the imagination. And that takes work. That isn't something, because our society kind of combs that out of us.
It
And
does.
that was
And
hard work for you, yes?
well, yeah, and for me, I like to make it a little bit less personal and more just general. The reality, when we're teaching narrative sand therapy, this is one of those key things, right? It is recognizing uh and and then learning how
Mm-hmm.
the clinician's role is to move into that. The way we bring the client into that altered state, the way we help them activate their own imagination is through our own familiarity with that process and our ability to move into it ourselves. And
Yes.
then the natural course is to follow, because we've all been kids, we all know how to do this. It's an incredibly developmentally important and useful part of our psyche. So it's not everyone can do it. It's just a matter of getting past the injunctions and the shame of around creativity and all the things that we've learned to shut that stuff down. But the other thing that I'd like to say about this is that uh, it's one of the really beautiful skills that often is developed through a strong religious or spiritual kind of practice or orientation, is this ability to move into a prayerful, meditative,
Mm-hmm.
imaginative world.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we can learn it through any number of ways. Reading books is a wonderful way to feed the imagination and to grow it. But that really, I have reflected many times on how valuable my experience in religious settings growing up has ultimately been in terms of helping me just
Mm-hmm.
automatically move into one of those
Beautiful.
altered states, and just
Yes.
I'm there, I'm in the sand, so to speak, with
Yes.
the client running down the side of the street and finding the bush, and I see it around me and I feel it, and I'm listening to the dad
Yeah.
and I'm feeling the shame and the fear
Mm-hmm.
inside, and so on,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we do, right? That's how we're there. And when we tear, right, authentically
Yeah.
with a client, it's
Yes.
what gives them permission to do the same, to feel the grief and so on.
Mm. Thank you for that, Tim. You brought two symbols, and I think this might be a time for the sharing. If you would share one symbol at a time, and then describe for us its meaning, what it represents, which may change from day to day for you. But what does it mean? And then let's just go through a brief exercise with your symbols. What did you bring?
Sure. So you know me, I always jump into the deep end of the pool. Uh, this is one of my all-time favorite symbols. And there are so many layers to this guy. But the
Look at that
I start,
backbone and my goodness.
yeah, the emaciation
And
and
the,
the
oh, yes, the ribs and yeah.
so when I first met this guy, he was in one of my trays at your studio,
Mhm.
and across his lap was a revolver, right there nestled between
Mhm.
his feet and hand. And just looking at his face, uh, I was I
Yeah.
was really utterly disgusted by the symbol overall. I didn't know why it had gone in my tray. Um, and
Mm.
I had some sense of it, but it was I was just completely repulsed and ashamed. Uh, Very deep emotion around the symbol, and he has become, now I think I paid like
Mm.
$100 for this on eBay, I think. It's very hard to come across. It's an older symbol. He has become one of, or he is absolutely my favorite symbol. Uh, and the reason is because, when we started working with him, I was initially focused on how terrifying that face is.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
The visual for me, honestly, this is a guy who uh, looks for opportunity. I was imagining him as like a World War II kind of death camp or something like that, or somewhere, where there's like total war going on.
Mm.
And uh, I was imagining him as someone who would slit your throat for a crust of bread kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
he's just it's obviously he's struggling to survive. And so it's just a matter of like there's no mercy, right? It's literally just
Mm.
survival.
Yeah.
Uh and as we began to work with him, uh and I began to, you know, you started recognizing, pointing out things that you were saying, the inability to breathe, even the air that is around him. And oh
Yeah.
my God, wow, right? And then the um, the resilience, the ability to survive in these absolutely unsustainable, unbearable, unbelievable circumstances. Uh, the pistol across his lap. When I was 12 years old, I was playing Russian roulette with myself in my parents' bedroom with my father's 357 revolver. And I thought I knew where the round was. I was spinning it and cocking it and clicking the trigger at my head, and then I would do it at the mirror.
Mm.
And I thought I knew where the bullet was every time. I wasn't committed to taking my own life, but obviously deeply suicidal, deep suicidal ideation, and just a lot of despair.
Mm-mm.
And the gun happened to go off when it was pointed at the mirror. I had obviously miscalculated where the round was. And it just as easily could have been at my own head. There's no reason that it happened to be pointing at the mirror when it went off. And so in any event, this guy has just really come to represent to me that the shame that we all carry, we as clinicians carry over our own
Yes.
stuff, uh, and the the judgment too that we tend towards, that when we look at figure or a part of ourself or part of one of our clients, the inclination that we have to judge, to dismiss, to moralize about it, about where they are, the decisions they've made, or that we've made, or whatever. And so that's why he's become so significant to me, is he just reminds me to get curious and to look at the sort of other side of what's immediately apparent to me.
Mhm.
That resilience, that strength, that courage to survive, and the willingness to survive at all costs,
Yes.
and so on. So
Mm. Mm.
that's him.
Powerful, powerful, powerful.
Uh,
Ah,
the second one, this is my other favorite symbol that on my shelves.
okay.
Uh, and this guy just kills me. Um,
So we've got
it's the
Darwin book, and I
Yeah, it
see
says Darwin on it,
is a
and there's
chimp.
some
Mhm.
Latin script on the front there. I forget what it means.
Uh-huh.
But there's just this
Mm.
you're very familiar with, and as you know, Dr. D, one of my other favorite symbols is the sort of like meditative, sort of
Yeah.
thinking man kind of
Yes.
pose, right?
Yes.
And of course, the artist here is
The
very much
thinker,
represented that, right?
and looking right at a human
But
skull.
yes, the irony of this and the
Yeah.
layers are just absolutely fantastic to me. So obviously encapsulated here is the instinctual, the awareness of ourselves as animals, and how much we like to examine everyone else. We here, I guess, like to look around at every other living creature and every other thing
Uh,
that we don't understand, and
mhm.
judge it as less than ourselves, and think that that we're somehow special, or whatever. Uh, I love the humor, the smile, the sort of like smile,
Mm,
on the monkey's face and in the skull too.
mhm.
So I don't know. There are just so many layers. Don't take yourself too seriously. Just uh, recognize our own limitations. Like just take a minute and laugh at how stupid we are.
Well, it also speaks to mortality. I mean, the skull is a dead one, and that
Yes, it
that
does.
chimp is, I'm here, I'm alive, and I'm
Yes, that's
sitting on
right.
the knowledge, buddy. It's like you said, it has so many layers.
Yes.
Um, Tim, what would happen if now they come together? The one who suffers and who's resilient, and then and this humorous but yet thoughtful. What if these two come together? And if you bring them together, let's see if they have something to say to each other. If they then have something to say to you, and then maybe they might turn to us and tell us something they want us to understand or to know. So, would you like to pull them together so that we can see what that might look like if they were to approach you? Would they look at each other? Are they aware? Do they know each other now that they live with you? As they're, look at that, they're looking right at you. How is that? How is that for you?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind whenever you like I start choking up, tearing up whenever you talk about them coming together and kind of becoming one. And you know, it feels arrogant to say it out loud, but I
Hmm.
uh I just I know that that's we're always projecting ourselves right into the symbols. And so it's what's happened for me, as a person.
Mhm.
And I think, in terms of what they would say to each other, it's like deep appreciation for the really profound gifts and insight of each. And this is the part that I think is worth sharing is there's also back to that authenticity. There's also concern, authentic concern, frustration, anger. Uh, how dare you treat them that way? You know, uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
how dare you not consider their feelings,
Mhm.
the feelings of the other or the
Mhm.
needs of the other?
Mhm.
There's nurture, uh, but it's balanced also with truth and with limits.
Mhm.
Uh, and there's humor, but it's balanced with depth
Mhm.
and
Mhm. Mhm. There's real incredible human mortality on both sides.
yeah,
And
there is.
I hear underneath what you're saying, social justice is about evolutionary justice and the how your expression of how dare you, not from that horrible shaming position, but rather a pushing back of why are you degrading, devastating, stealing from other human beings, their soul, their
Yes,
psyche, their
yes.
life?
Yeah, in when I'm thinking through that voice of like, how dare you? It's coming from the monkey toward the emaciated one, and it's referencing that like slitting the throat to steal to take a crust of bread, and so that how dare you, that indignation, that anger,
Mhm.
that protectiveness is
Mhm.
is coming out not as a criticism, not as a judgment,
Right.
but as a uh admonition, as a way, as a like, wake up. It's in the context of nurture and appreciation for uh courage and for the capacity, the resilience and the capacity to survive and so on. it's not anchored in shame or judgment about the
No.
past, but it's rather focused squarely in the present.
Hmm.
And what are you doing right
Yes.
now? Be
Yes.
mindful
Mm.
of how you're engaging with others, how you're treating yourself, how you're looking at the world,
Yeah.
and so on.
Oh, um, one, I wonder if you would ask them if they, one or both, have something they'd like to turn and say to us. If they're, because symbols carry wisdoms, and I know this comes from you spontaneously. This isn't, we don't pre program this or anything. It's all in the here and now. It's very immediacy. Do either one of them have something that they want to say to all of us?
I think it's just learn to trust yourself, learn to listen to yourself, learn to listen to others. You know, that whole I oftentimes differentiate between selfishness and self-centeredness. And I like to say that self-centeredness is inevitable. We can't help it. We're the only one that benefits from the stream of information from our eyes and our nerve endings and so on. How else could we center ourselves? But holding that sense, I think they would just say, don't take yourself to be worth more than the other, and don't allow the other to be valued more than yourself within
Mm,
yourself.
mm, mm. Beautiful, very empowering, and hopefully very validating for all of us. Thank you. And Tim, I know that if we were just seated together, that you would continue and go into cycles of very hermeneutic cycle of cycling down into more deep. There's so
Sure.
much that
Oh, there's so many
can be
layers of
done,
personal stuff, and
and
and then
professional and everything.
yes, and
It's
it
amazing.
right, it's always endless.
It's deep, and I think depth that you're embracing with your clients and that you're sharing with us right now is a part of bringing depth and meaning and some healing to hopefully ripple out to the world. Let's move then up one step to what is it that you wish you had learned? What if there was, for example, if there was something in your graduate program, not a specific graduate program, graduate studies, internship, whatever, what do you wish could change in the training of mental health professionals that would make it better? What do you wish could change? And also, another branch of this is what do you wish you had known then, way back then, as you were beginning, that that you now know, that you've discovered along the way? Those really two different paths.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, uh, am I limited to only one thing that I could change about the
No,
sort of
please.
training? Right.
Oh, please give us the list.
I'm joking, but it's yeah,
But I
there's
bet
a
you have a
lot.
list.
Yeah, I do have a list. But honestly, really, when you talk about when you ask like what is it that you wish you would have known, it's kind of the same thing. It's the same answer for both. Uh, and one is I would have liked to have seen more humility throughout uh,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
throughout
Mm.
my early training.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
clinicians, as clinicians, I think, what is most important is our recognition of how ignorant we are and how little we actually know about our clients. And how can our clients trust us
Mm-hmm.
when we're coming in with this, big degree, this big, like, we have
Mm.
the answers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's so, and that is being promulgated right from the start within the university from the
Yes.
professors.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
is modeled, it creates injuries for students as they go through a training
Yeah.
process,
Yes.
and their own humility, their own authenticity is oftentimes uh, crushed and pushed away, repressed, suppressed, because it's not safe to even bring it into the academic space or the learning space. So what would I change? I would want professors who are humble, who are self-aware, who have done their own freaking work,
Mhm.
and that when they show up, they model that through authenticity and through vulnerability, and that they cultivate that in the classroom, not as a therapeutic space itself, but as a space that absolutely carries therapeutic value, because by golly, that's what we're learning to freaking do. And we need to
Yes.
see it
Oh.
happening in order for us to be able to reproduce it
Mm.
in our work with clients. So it would be humility, it would be really depth work being modeled um,
Mhm.
in the classroom, so
Mm.
to speak,
Mhm.
throughout graduate training and so on.
Mm. Balancing
And
the
I wish,
academic with compassion and with full, honest presence, the very model
yes,
of being immediate and empathic, as well as encouraging rigor rather than just moving the herd along.
yes, it doesn't, it never fails. So in response to the question, what would I like to have known? Would have liked to have known that there wasn't something wrong with me, or that I didn't have to give up my credentials as a man, my credentials as an intellectual, in order to be emotional, in order to be
Mhm.
authentic, in order to be vulnerable. That I
Mhm.
don't have that this guy can show
Yes.
up in a freaking classroom
Uh-huh.
and not be hammered for being naked and
Mhm.
ugly and scary and yada yada yada. Why
Mhm.
can't we go into a classroom and be engaged in that space, if this is what we're learning to do, and be engaged in that space
Yes.
in a way that replicates that which we would want to do with our clients? That's what I would like to see. And I would like to have known that earlier in I would have liked to have had the clarity earlier in my training that, oh, there's a lot of ego going on
Yeah.
around here. And no, I don't know what I'm doing and I am here to learn. That doesn't make me less valuable. And that doesn't make my perspective less valuable, or my experience to be bad or wrong, or yeah, on and on and on.
So much, I think, of what you're saying leads to burnout for clinicians who have never taken on the freedom to trust themselves. As you mentioned so much during our conversation today, the trust, immersing in one's work, and then giving
Yes,
oneself permission to start to trust that inner child and
yes,
to be vulnerable and strong, to model as well as to be the witness, the good father, the good mother,
yes, yes,
the holder and the witness rather than the director.
yes.
And then to be open to constant learning, not that okay, you got your license and it's a done deal, and
No,
so then
no, it's
I
a lifelong
it's
process,
a
right?
lifelong process. Everything
Yes,
you just said about humility and about growth and learning cannot stop at the classroom or at the
that's right.
license. Be, it must permeate professional training
Yes.
throughout, no matter one's
And
discipline. Oh,
so this one would say to this one and to everyone out there, here's a book. Take one of the books. I have a lot of them. Find a book, find your own stack of books and read, right?
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's that sort of humorous, but also inspiring and driving us to be our best selves. That radical authenticity. It's not we so often, and that's why just coming back to Rogers, so often we have no problem as a society and as clinicians, we have no problem with the unconditional positive regard by and large in this space. As a society, there are some problems with that, but
Mhm,
nonetheless, most
mhm,
clinicians embrace that no problem. most clinicians also do reasonably well in the accurate empathic response area. We tend to be pretty empathic people, and we tend to be decent at reflecting it back. Uh, it's where we break down is not balancing it with that radical authenticity, with that
Mm,
clarity and that
yes.
push. Let's be the best versions of ourselves that we can. It's not, I don't have to shame someone to recognize that, it'd probably be worthwhile to read a book. You know, I can model with my own vulnerability that it's safe to be vulnerable in this space.
Yeah.
And so if I want to inspire, again, through recognizing, allowing my clients, what do we learn from our clients? I learn all kinds of ways that I can improve myself. And so allowing myself to be
Mm,
inspired by them, as well as
mm.
seeking to inspire them in some ways.
The through line that I'm hearing from the the trauma, the growing up in a cult, releasing the imprisonment to allow your creativity and your immediacy and your authenticity and honesty, the truth that must continue to work away at one's soul, one's psyche. And so the through line then brings us through your compassion and empathy and presence, that continued learning. What can I discover and learn from every client every day? A freshness, a releasing of the mandates of recipes, and yet read a book, stay knowledgeable,
Yes,
stay
yes.
within some, keep it safe, but be informed. And I know your interest in neuropsych. We haven't touched on that, but I know that you combine that with your little skull chimp person there, as well as the one who is unable to breathe, that we cannot, that we will burn out if we don't breathe and if we don't reflect and take a look at
Yes.
our own mortality. Look at all the threads from your own experience with the geriatric, with even the pediatric, with death, and
Mhm.
and your creativity. And I so appreciate the examples, and I know you have many more. We'll have to do another interview, Tim. But before we bring closure, is I like guests to, what is it that you want to say to our viewers in your closure? What is it that from your heartfelt self, and from this scholarly self, as a whole clinician, what is it that you want to leave us with?
Uh, a saying attributed to the Buddha. Be kind, for everyone we meet is fighting a great battle. Be kind to ourselves, be kind to yourselves, uh, and just, yeah, I think from a place of nourishment, push yourself. Be There's another, the Gandhi quote, right? Be the person, that be the change that you want to see in the world.
Mm.
That I think those things kind of just, they're the heartthrob for me. They drive me, in my work as a coach, with the St. John's Crew team, and in my work with clients, and in my personal life as a parent, as just a human being.
Yes.
And so, yeah,
Mm. Mm. Absorbing the depth and meaningfulness from you. You've been so gracious and empowering. Thank you so much, Tim. And viewers, thank you taking the the kind empowering words that Tim leaves for us. And I hope that you're walking forward, taking very gentle, very good care of yourself. I look forward to being with you in our next interview. Feel free to share these videos that are on YouTube and on the website, sandtherapytraining.com. Take gentle and very good care.
thank you. Bye, Dr. D.